The city was wrapped in silence that night, one of those deep winter evenings when even the wind seemed to carry a kind of sorrow. Snow drifted lazily under the yellow streetlights, gathering in quiet corners where no footsteps had disturbed it. The roads were half empty. People had already retreated to the warmth of their homes, closing the doors on the biting cold. Ethan's boots crunched against the snow as he walked down the dimly lit street. His hands were buried deep in his worn-out coat pockets, and his breath came out in pale clouds. He had just finished a late shift at the small factory where he worked as a mechanic. The day had been long and unremarkable: machines, noise, silence, and a clock that refused to move faster. His back ached, his stomach grumbled, and all he could think about was heating up the leftover soup waiting in his tiny apartment. As he turned the corner near the old bakery, something made him slow his steps. At first, he thought it was just a pile of discarded blankets near the wall. But then, a faint sound, a soft whimper, almost lost in the wind, made him stop. Ethan squinted through the falling snow. There, huddled under the flickering glow of a broken streetlight, was a young woman. Her clothes were thin and damp, her hair tangled with bits of snow. In her arms, she held a small child, wrapped tightly in what looked like a torn jacket. For a moment, Ethan stood frozen. He wasn't used to seeing people like this, not here, not so close to his neighborhood. The city had shelters, but he knew they were overcrowded and cold themselves. He could see the woman's shoulders trembling, her head bent protectively over the child. He hesitated, unsure what to do. Part of him wanted to keep walking, to pretend he hadn't seen them. It was late, it wasn't his problem, but another part, the quiet part he had tried to silence for years, told him to stop. He approached slowly, not wanting to frighten her. "Miss," he said softly, "are you all right?" The woman flinched at the sound of his voice. She looked up, her eyes wide and tired, as if she hadn't slept in days. The child stirred in her arms, letting out a small cough. Ethan saw her tighten her grip around the boy. I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We have nowhere to go." The words hung in the air like a prayer lost in the snow. Ethan felt them hit something deep inside him, something he thought he had buried long ago. He remembered a night not unlike this one, years ago, when he had stood on a similar street, clutching a bag of his last belongings, wondering where to go next after his wife's death and losing their home. Now, looking at the woman and the child, he saw a reflection of his own past pain. The cold wind blew harder, but Ethan didn't move. He simply stood there, heart heavy, realizing that maybe fate had brought him to this exact moment, for a reason he couldn't yet understand. And somewhere in the distance, the city kept sleeping, unaware that on this forgotten street corner, 3 lives were about to change forever. Ethan stood there, motionless, the woman's words echoing in his mind, "We have nowhere to go." The snow fell quietly between them, each flake settling like a silent question. Would he walk away, or would he stay? For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. He looked at the young mother. Her eyes were filled with exhaustion, yet behind that weariness burned a faint glimmer of hope, the fragile kind that refuses to die even in the coldest nights. The child in her arms whimpered softly, his small fingers clutching at her sleeve. Ethan swallowed hard. He wasn't a man of wealth or grand gestures. His life had become a routine of quiet survival: work, eat, sleep, repeat. He rented a tiny apartment that barely had enough heat, and his savings account was little more than a memory. The thought of bringing strangers into his fragile world frightened him. He could almost hear his late wife's voice, calm and kind as always. "Ethan, kindness doesn't ask if it's convenient." He looked down, snow collecting on his coat sleeves. He had once known what it felt like to be lost, to be invisible. After his wife's illness, the medical bills had taken everything. There had been nights he'd slept on benches, pretending to wait for someone, just to avoid being noticed. He had felt the sting of cold, the weight of hunger, and the shame of asking for help. No one had stopped for him then. No one except an old janitor named Carl, who had offered him a warm cup of coffee and a place to sleep on a broken couch. That one act of kindness had changed the course of his life. And now, standing in front of this woman and her shivering child, he realized fate had brought the same test to his doorstep. Ethan took a deep breath. "Do you have family here?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "No one. We left everything behind. I thought we'd find something better, but—" her voice cracked. "It's been days since we ate properly." Ethan felt a sharp ache in his chest. The logical part of him whispered, "You can't afford this, Ethan. You'll barely make it through the month." But the voice of his heart, the one he'd ignored for far too long, spoke louder. "You know what it means to be alone. Don't turn away." Without thinking further, he stepped closer and extended his hand. The woman looked at it, uncertain, afraid it might be a cruel trick. But his eyes, steady, kind, and tired, told her otherwise. "Come on," he said softly. "It's too cold out here. You can stay at my place tonight." She blinked in disbelief. "But, we don't even know you." Ethan gave a faint, weary smile. "That's all right. You don't have to. Just know that for tonight, you're safe." And with those few simple words, "You do now." Something invisible shifted in the air. The snow kept falling, but the night no longer felt so cold. For the first time in years, Ethan felt a warmth rising inside him, not from the heater waiting in his apartment, but from the quiet, powerful glow of compassion rediscovered. 3 lonely souls began walking through the snow, not as strangers, but as people who, in their own broken ways, had just found each other. The walk to Ethan's apartment was quiet. The snow crunched beneath their feet, and the wind whispered through the empty streets like a distant song. The woman, Anna, as she later introduced herself, carried her little boy close to her chest. The child's small face was pressed against her shoulder, his eyes half open, his breath shallow and tired. Ethan walked beside them, his heart heavy with thoughts he couldn't quite name. When they finally reached his building, Ethan hesitated for a moment before unlocking the door. It wasn't much to look at, an old structure with peeling paint and flickering lights in the hallway. But it was warm, and tonight, that was all that mattered. "Come in," he said quietly, pushing the door open. "It's not fancy, but it's warmer than outside." Anna stepped inside cautiously, her eyes scanning the small space. The apartment was simple. A worn-out couch, a tiny kitchen with mismatched plates, a small heater humming weakly in the corner. Yet, for someone who had been sleeping on streets and in abandoned bus stops, it felt like stepping into another world. Ethan walked to the stove and began to heat a pot of water. "I'll make some tea," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "And I think I have some soup left from yesterday." Anna nodded silently, lowering her son onto the couch. The boy's eyes flickered open, curiosity fighting against exhaustion. He looked at Ethan, then at the small heater glowing softly in the corner, and finally whispered, "It's warm, Mama." Something inside Ethan stirred at those words. He turned away quickly, pretending to focus on the tea. He remembered the sound of his wife's voice years ago, her laughter as she handed him a steaming cup after a long day. For a fleeting moment, he felt that warmth again. When the tea was ready, he handed Anna a chipped cup. She took it with trembling hands, murmuring a quiet, "Thank you." "You don't have to thank me," Ethan replied, sitting down across from her. "Everyone deserves a place to rest." Anna's eyes filled with tears. "We've been moving from town to town. I lost my job after the factory closed, and then the rent, the landlord threw us out." She wiped her cheeks quickly, embarrassed by her own vulnerability. Ethan listened silently. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer advice or pity. He simply nodded, because he understood. Pain didn't always need answers, sometimes it just needed to be heard. He stood, walked to the small closet, and pulled out a thick wool coat. "Here," he said softly, placing it on the armrest beside her. "It belonged to my wife. It should fit you." Anna hesitated. "I can't. I don't want to take something so personal." Ethan smiled faintly. "She would have wanted me to share it. She had a kind heart." The child had already drifted to sleep, wrapped in Ethan's old blanket. The apartment was filled with quiet warmth, not from the heater, but from something deeper. That night, as the storm raged outside, 3 people who had once been strangers found a small piece of peace under the same roof. Ethan sat by the window, watching the snow fall, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. Weeks passed, and the sharp winter slowly began to soften into early spring. The snow on the streets melted into small rivers that ran along the sidewalks, and the once gray sky began to show hints of blue. Life inside Ethan's small apartment, too, began to change, quietly, almost without him realizing it. Anna had found small cleaning jobs in the neighborhood. Every morning, she would bundle her son up, drop him off at a local daycare that accepted low-income families, and then head out with a broom and bucket in hand. She worked long hours, but she never complained. When she came home in the evenings, her hands rough and tired, she would still smile. "We made it through another day," she'd say softly, as if it were a small victory, and in truth, it was. Ethan watched all this with a kind of humble admiration. He had offered her shelter expecting nothing in return, yet she brought light back into his home. She cooked warm meals when she could, mended his torn shirts, and filled the quiet apartment with laughter again, laughter he hadn't heard since his wife passed away. Her son, little Leo, had grown fond of Ethan. The boy followed him around, asking endless questions about tools and machines. Ethan, amused and touched, began teaching him how to fix simple things: a loose chair leg, a squeaky hinge, the toy car Leo adored. The apartment that had once been silent now buzzed with gentle noise, the clink of tools, the smell of soup, the occasional burst of giggles. One evening, Ethan came home to find the table set neatly, 2 cups of tea waiting, and an envelope resting beside his plate. Anna was standing by the window, looking out at the fading sunset. "What's this?" he asked, picking up the envelope. She turned, her eyes glistening but calm. "Just something I wanted to give you before I forget how to say it." Ethan opened it. Inside was a small note, written in delicate, uneven handwriting. "Thank you for giving us a home when the world turned away. You reminded me that kindness still exists, and that hope can grow even from the coldest nights." Beneath the note was a folded bill, some of the money she had earned from her cleaning jobs. Ethan's heart twisted. "Anna, you don't have to do this," he said softly. "I never wanted anything from you." "I know," she whispered. "That's why I want to." She smiled through her tears. "You gave us back our dignity, Ethan. I just want to give something back, even if it's small." For a moment, neither spoke. The warmth in the room wasn't from the heater, it came from something wordless and pure. Ethan carefully folded the note, placed it back into the envelope, and said quietly, "Then let's call it even. You gave me something too." Anna tilted her head. "What did I give you?" He smiled gently. "A reason to believe again." Outside, the first stars appeared above the rooftops. Inside that little apartment, 3 hearts that had once been broken now beat in quiet harmony, proof that sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness can create the biggest miracles. Months slipped by like pages turning in a quiet book. Spring had given way to summer, and the small apartment that once felt cold and lifeless now pulsed with warmth and color. The window sills were lined with tiny potted plants Anna had rescued from a nearby market. The faint smell of home-cooked meals filled the air, and the sound of Leo's laughter had become the soundtrack of Ethan's days. Every morning, Ethan woke to the cheerful chaos of breakfast, Leo chattering about something he'd learned, Anna humming softly as she poured tea. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't dread waking up alone. The silence that used to greet him each dawn had been replaced by life, real, noisy, beautiful life. One afternoon, as the golden light streamed through the window, Anna came home holding a letter in her trembling hands. "Ethan," she said, her voice a mix of joy and disbelief. "I got the job. The hotel near the station. They need a full-time cleaner. It comes with a small housing allowance." Ethan's face broke into a proud smile. "That's incredible, Anna. You've worked so hard for this." She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "It's all because of you. You gave me a place to start again." Ethan shook his head gently. "No, Anna, you did that yourself. I just opened the door. You walked through it." That evening, they celebrated with a simple dinner: soup, bread, and a small cake Leo had picked out from the bakery. The laughter that filled the apartment that night was soft, but it carried the weight of victory, of survival, of gratitude too deep for words. Later, after Leo had fallen asleep, Anna and Ethan sat quietly by the window. The city outside glittered with lights, the hum of life drifting in through the open glass. "I'll be moving out soon," Anna said softly, though her voice trembled. "The job provides a small place nearby. I'll finally be able to stand on my own 2 feet." Ethan nodded slowly, though a pang of sadness tugged at him. "That's what I wanted for you, for both of you." There was a long silence. Then Anna looked at him, her eyes reflecting the city lights. "You saved us, Ethan. I don't know how to ever repay that." He smiled faintly, his gaze distant but peaceful. "You already have. You brought life back into this place, into me." For a moment, they simply sat there, two people whose paths had crossed in the most unlikely way, bound by kindness and fate. When Anna and Leo finally moved into their new home, Ethan helped carry their boxes. Before leaving, Leo ran back and hugged him tightly. "We'll come visit, right, Mama?" Anna smiled. "Of course we will." As they walked away, Ethan stood by the doorway, watching until they disappeared down the street. A bittersweet ache filled his chest, but it was the kind that comes with pride, not loss. That night, as he sat by the window alone, snow began to fall again, just like the night they met. He smiled softly and whispered into the quiet, "You'll never have nowhere to go again." And though his apartment was still and silent, the warmth they left behind lingered, proof that the truest light isn't found in wealth or comfort, but in the simple act of opening your heart to another soul. The kind of light that never fades. The kind of light that stays.